Welcome all the participants. I, Dr. Sunil Sehwal, welcoming you all in this event. The event is International Training and Internship Program, opportunity for R&D ecosystem and tech-driven startup. We have started this event from 20th of June, and this is our 30th talk session. I am Sunil Semal. I am working at Tulas Institute as a associate professor in electronics department. We are organizing this event with Tech Counselor. I am very thankful for Tech Counselor support. This event is co-organized by Krishna Institute of Medical Science, deemed to be University Maharashtra. This event is sponsored by TQ, Uttarakhand Technical University. We have some industry partners also, like Yuvayana Tech and Craft, Swachh Neer, Boudik Venture, Kaviraj Foundation. Till date, we have different speakers, eminent speakers from industry, like Dr. Rajkumar Haldar, Madan Kanala, and speakers from academic, like Dr. Manoj Kumar Panda and engineer Naveen Kumar from France, Siva Prasad from Bangalore, Abhishek Gupta from Hungary, and Vinay Kumar Chaudhary from UPS. Today we have very eminent speaker, Dr. Fabio Masi from Italy. Mukesh will introduce you just after my speech. I am ending my speech with a quote by Jessica Herron. The quote is, "You have to see failure as the beginning and the middle, but never entertain it at an end." It means that at the starting of the startup or any venture, you might have failure, but at the end, you will definitely succeed. So now I am handovering the session to Mukesh to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Fabio Masi. Mukesh?
Thank you, Dr. Samuel. Indeed, it's a great pleasure for having Dr. Fabio with us and as well as for your kind support throughout the program. I'm very much thankful to the whole Tulas team and to the Krishna Institute of Medical Science for this wonderful program and for initiating such a wonderful movement during the time of pandemic. And certainly, we have turned out it as an opportunity, which definitely going to help to the whole audience. So, good afternoon and a warm welcome to all the audience for the International Training and Internship Program. I'm Mukesh, Technical Research Advisor and founder of the Tech Counselor Group, a recognized startup company working toward research and innovation since 2013. And today we have Dr. Fabio Masi, a well-known name in the water treatment technology domain. So with having 2 decades plus of experience, including 40 plus publications, 20 plus books, almost 50 plus other publications, he's having more than 1200 plus citation and have an H index of 20. A regular lecturer and a speaker in numerous universities in Italy, France, Spain, India, China, and have been delivering lectures on 130 plus courses. Also, he have been a keynote speaker, guest authors, and chair to more than 50 plus conferences and sessions. So he did his PhD on environmental sciences in 1996 from University of Rome, and having an expertise on environmental chemistry, wastewater treatment with a specialization in use of constructed wetland for the water pollution control. So Fabio is technical director, R&D manager of the Italian engineering company IRIDIRA since 1998 and is looking after multiple projects for the sustainable water management and wastewater treatment projects in different countries and different region of the globe, including Europe, Asia, Africa, and South America. Some of them include Austria, Germany, Italy, India, France, Spain, Egypt, United Kingdom, Jordan, Denmark, and to many other, and have contributed on more than 450 designs of constructed wetlands for the wastewater treatment and reuse project in the world. Also, it is really a pleasure for us to inform that Fabio is also handling a mega project for EU-India water cooperation on potential and validation of sustainable and advanced technologies for water and wastewater treatment monitoring and safe water use at India. To his honor and award, he has been the organizer of the 12th IWA-SG ICWS conference in Venice in October 2010. Also, he was chair of International Water Association Specialist Group on Wetland System for the Water Pollution Control since 2012 to 16. He is the chair of IWA Task Force on Nature-Based Solutions for the Water and Sanitation since 2018. He is also associated editor for the IWA journal Water Science and Technology since 2010, and editor for Water MDPI since 2012, and have been reviewer for several different journals. Since 2012 to 14, he's been also consultant for Agrico GEIE as an evaluator of EC proposal, and he has covered the same role for MWH Global for the period of 14 to 15. He has been evaluator of research program for the Estonian and Kazakh Ministries of Research. Adding to his award, he is one of the founder representing IRIDRA of the Professional Association Global Wetland Technology, where he is serving as a vice president since 2013. Other than these accolades, he has been awarded by numerous agencies, government, and countries for his outstanding work in the field of wastewater and constructed wetland. I'm very much thankful to you, Dr. Fabio, for accepting Tech Counselor request to be an expert of the session and to deliver an interactive talk on nature-based research and innovative solutions for the next generation startup. I'm sure that this talk will open new dimensions and horizon to young mind, and they will have an opportunity to explore into the domain for their entrepreneurial journey. Welcome again on behalf of the whole team, and requesting you to please take the session forward. Uh, Thank you once again, Fabio sir. Handing over to you.
Thank you very much, Mukesh, for your very nice introduction, and very good afternoon for you in India. It's still morning here in Italy. To all the participants, so welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to start my presentation, and so I'm entering in presentation mode at the moment. Sorry, 1 second. Here I am. We will have a session of question and answers just at the end of my speech, so which will be almost after 1 hour and something since now. And we are starting just having a sort of broad idea about the kind of issues we will talk about in terms of possible solutions, which are at the moment just at the border of the proven applied research and the application of this proven applied research in terms of lab scale demonstration, installations, and so on, to the real market. I mean, the application in the reality in full scale. And so that's exactly where my company is operating since more than 20 years. We are divided in one sector, which is normal engineering, where we do design assistance to the supervision of works and then commissioning and monitoring of nature-based solutions, which are used mainly for dealing with water pollution, or anyway with environmental pollution issues. And the other half of the company, which is the department I'm leading, is dealing with research and innovation, or research and development. And so what we do is just to find new applications for the nature-based solutions that we know, or we just invent new ones. Invent is something that maybe not the right word, because we are just trying to replicate what nature is doing in most of the times for dealing with particular kind of pollutants that we define in some occasions as pollutants. So I start every time since a lot of years. I'm presenting this kind of module I'm going to present to you this morning. And I always start with this series of slides where we see all the problems that the industrialization has created in the last 2 centuries on the planet. And the more red and intense is the section of this graph colored, the more intense the problem is. And so what we see here is on the left that the biodiversity loss has been the biggest damage created by the industrialization. So all these issues are obviously anthropogenic, which is meaning they are created by the human behavior and how we use the resources on the planet. Then, as the second, in terms of intensity, we have the nitrogen and the phosphorus cycles, which are both quite intense. The phosphorus cycle is very close to this inner green circle, which is exactly the limit of the sustainability of the use of resources on the planet. If we go above this green circle threshold, let's say, then we are overusing the planet, which is meaning that we are making use of more resources in comparison to what we could really make use of in terms of availability per person, per capita. So the nitrogen and the phosphorus cycles are due to mandatory cycles for the subsistence of the humanity on the planet, because they are extremely linked to the food safety and security in terms of provision and quality of the food, but mainly with the provision of it. So the production of food, starting from the agriculture, going to the breeding. Then climate change is another big issue, and then there are the acidification of the oceans, a lot of chemical pollutions going around, transmission of a lot of organic compounds by aerosolization, fresh water availability, the ozone depletion on the stratosphere. So those are all the main issues. And what we see, this is the very, very last updated one. Still, we have this nitrogen. The phosphorus in this very last updated is more evident than before. So it's really above the limit over here, also in this one. These two are quite similar, I would say, in terms of quantification of the impacts, exactly the same, I would say. And so still biodiversity loss and the two biogeochemical cycles are the more disrupted ones in terms of impact of the last centuries. So exactly talking about a bit more than 1 century, what we have is that in the last 70 years, we some way shrink the planet. This is not meaning, obviously, that we have a physical shrink of the Earth, but we are using, due to the growing population, exponentially growing population, every number of years, we have substantially like a reduction in terms of availability per person. Like in 70 years ago, we were having pro capita, so per person, about 5.2 hectares and 2.3 cubic meters of water. And in 2040, we will have 1.7 instead of 5.2 and 1.4 instead of 4.3, which is meaning that the availability of resources is decreasing in the time. And so we can really see to these cycles where we have created more impact. And the first one is the all-time uneven and unfair distribution of the water on the planet. You know that the usable water in the planet is not so much. You can see in this graph here that 97% of the water produced on the planet is available on the planet is salty water, so it's containing lot of grams per liter of sodium chloride, and this high salinity is not making it usable, drinkable as it is by the humans. There is too much salt inside. For keeping the salt out, we need to make a process which is called desalination, and this process is requiring energy. And for the moment, in a lot of situations and a lot of countries of the world, there is still a big problem in accessing potable water, which is meaning non-salty water, because of this uneven distribution of the rain events, which are not falling with the same intensity over all the planet everywhere in the same way. So we have only the 3% of the water present on the planet which is not salty, and about the 69% of this water is still kept at the moment as ice in the solid phase, wherever it's cold enough. I mean, in the two poles and in the high mountains as glaciers and so on. Unluckily, this amount is strongly decreasing, even in a too fast way due to the climate change, so that we have a lot of melting ice in the North Pole and in the South Pole. And also the glaciers are almost all going, at least the ones which are like 4,000, 5,000 meters of altitude. And then the other big part of this 3% of fresh water is staying as groundwater. And what we have been able to do in the last century has been to pollute a lot of these very nice groundwater reservoirs that we were using for thousands of years as one of the main sources by digging wells for the human usage. And the only issue is that if you put some organic molecules or heavy metals over there, I mean, you discharge polluted water in the underground, and so the groundwater becomes polluted too. This kind of pollution can last for centuries because all the degradation processes in the groundwater are much, much slower in comparison to what can happen on the surface when you have exchange with the atmosphere, the oxygen, and so you can have a lot of chemical processes taking place over there. Instead, all the transformation processes which are taking place in the groundwater are very, very slow and really ineffective. So once you have polluted it, then you can have it polluted for really centuries without being able to do nothing. You can even treat it by pumping out, treating, and refilling again by the one technique which is called the MAR, Managed Aquifer Recharge. But in that case, you still have to pay a lot of money, exactly in the same way that you can make desalination, taking salt out from the ocean or the sea water. But those are really too expensive processes for the moment, and the cost of the water could be too high to still having chances to be applied at worldwide level as a way to manage the resource. If we find a very economic way to produce energy, then we could really have a solution, taking water from seas and oceans and keeping the salt out and then reusing it as non-salty water. So what we see here is that at the end, what the humans are mainly using is the 0.3% of the 3%, which is exactly this amount here. which is then obtained, contained at least for the 87% in the big lakes. Most of them are at the border between Canada and North America, some others in Russia and in China, but still those are the biggest reservoirs of potable water in the world. And then there are some still existing wetlands, even though a lot of them have been dried out for favoring agriculture, still in the last century, even though their role was really, really relevant in terms of ecosystem services they are able to provide. So there are still existing wetlands, but they are at the moment quite well protected, so you can't make use of this water. And so what at the end we are using is mainly the water coming from rivers, which is the 2% of the 0.3% of the 3%, so a very, very small amount in comparison to what we have available on the planet. If you look at the crust of the planet, and then this sphere is all the water we have around, considering everything, oceans and so on, and that's there. If you put all together, those are exactly the dimensions of the spheres of the two materials which are surrounding the solid part of the planet. So why this? We are talking about the cycle of the water. I assume that there is the big water cycle, which is the transfer from the three phases, so the liquid, the solid, and the gaseous phase of the water, with quite normal temperature and pressure. We can have the three phases depending mainly by small variations of one of these parameters, two parameters of temperature or pressure. And so we can have evaporation and then recondensation, and rain is falling. If it is falling in a very high mountain, then it's shifting immediately to the solid phase, going to be snow and so on. And that's the big cycle of the water. And there is then a more local small cycle, which is normally created by waterproofing and heating some way in a different way from the pristine status, an area that is going to be urbanized, and so you have a strong modification. If you compare the urban management of the water with the normal way that the water was behaving before of the urbanization in the same area. And that's, you can have a local rural water cycle, which is very similar to the pristine, the natural one, and then the local urban water cycle, which is in the urban area. So all these cycles are strongly depending by the usage that the humans are doing of the water. And we, the WHO, the World Health Organization, has defined a minimum of 50 liters per person as a basic water need that everyone on the planet should be allowed to have, let's say, for free, just since the very first day of life to the very last one, because we need at least 5 liters for drinking and for survival, considering the cooking water that you are consuming every day, and the water which is included in the food you are consuming. Then there are some in these 50 liters. There are the other 45 liters which are aimed to human hygiene, and then for the sanitation services, like for instance this bad practice of flushing toilets, and then some other water for preparing food. Obviously, we have a hidden consumption of water, which is called, defined as virtual water, that is all the amount of this resource that we are consuming, for instance, for making tissue, for painting it, dyeing it, and for I don't know, growing cow and then producing meat. All this is called the virtual water. Is the water which is used in a production of a good that then you are using. What we can see here in this graph, for instance, is those are the total withdrawals of water in the planet, and in total millions of cubic meters. And what we see here is that the different countries are making a different usage of the water in the planet. We still have Mexico, Japan, and United States. The United States a lot of times more than the other countries are making consumption of water. And so that's how the water is consumed in the planet. Let's say what we see here is that the highest amounts are related to the east part of the planet. In Asia, we have the highest consumptions, but just because of the highest number of population living there. Instead, in the graph before, it was like the country consumption, and that's why the USA was the highest, because in terms of a single country consumption, that's the one which is consuming more water in the planet. And even in terms of pro capita consumption, which is meaning how much water every person is consuming. So what the consequence of all this is that we will get very big issues. Everywhere we have these brown colored areas, we will face some water scarcity in the next decades. So these problems are already started. These are quite old models, and they were just picturing these years, let's say 2010, 2020, as the ones in which most of these events should have started to show up. And that's exactly took place. So at the moment we are having a big water crisis in South Africa, in all these Maghreb area, in Middle East, in India, and so on, and also in the south of the States. And those are already crises which are taking place almost every year, everywhere. They are pictured in these models. So this is meaning that a big number of the population will have big issues in the access to the resource in the next years. We see also that the withdrawal is increasing still in an exponential way. That's strongly related to the exponential growth of the population, obviously. But what we see here is that just in 110 years, we shifted from, those are cubic kilometers consumed per year, from 500 to more than 4,000. So it's like 8 times more in just 100 years. And due to the resource is limited, this curve can't go up forever. I mean, at a certain time, it will have a limit that will be reached, and we are very, very, very close to that phase. That's why we should really think to the next years how one period in the history of the humans where we will have to deal a lot with the access to the basic resources for continuing our survival on the planet. So those are still models, and they are all saying the same thing, that in this part, the central part here of the world, we are going to have big issues in accessing the water, which is then bringing to wars. All these black areas are exactly where there are conflicts for the access of the water, which are already some way, they were already active in 2016, and they are still at the moment quite present. That's exactly the virtual water consumption, what I was saying before. What you see here in these histograms is that the black part, which is the highest consumption, is all times related to the agricultural goods. So it's the production of food, which is still consuming most of the water, even the virtual water that we are consuming. The white part is domestic water consumption, and the gray one are industrial goods.
Sorry to interrupt. Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, Fabio, sorry to interrupt. I think we are having some issues with the screen of your monitor. Can you just check it out? Yeah, presentation is like, yeah.
Now it's reduced.
Can you put the full screen now? Because it's going left toward left side.
What do you mean?
Half of the presentation is like not coming on the screen.
Really? I see.
Just 10% of the. Okay. Could be a technical glitch then.
Yeah, I see it very regularly here.
Okay.
And I can't touch nothing. I mean, it's in presentation mode, so I have it full screen.
Okay.
So anyway, also here, what's happening in this graph is showing that in the most Western countries, in terms of consumistic consumption of goods, we have the highest consumption of virtual water because of all the goods we are buying. And so we have USA, Italy, Thailand, Nigeria, and so on, which are the highest consumers. The red line is where we should, it's the average in the world. It's nothing, it's not a real threshold. So we still have in the planet that 80% of the sewage is still discharged untreated. I mean, we are using the water, putting pollutants in it and not cleaning it. So 80% of the wastewater produced in the world has to be cleaned. That's already a huge possible market in terms of green economy or possible jobs to be developed in the near future. And we need it because the dirtier is the water going around, the more we will have to pay in order to clean it for making use of it. So all this pollution we are sending around will have, first of them, a payback. We will have to pay back that money to the environment, let's say, just for cleaning what we have depleted some way, inserting pollutants in it. At industrial level, this is happening in even a more evident way. We have about from 3 to 400 million of tons, so million of cubic meters per year discharged every year in fresh water or on the ground from industries. So the pollution, cleaning the wastewater, the polluted water, is not considered as a mandatory part of the price of a good, the good that the industry is producing, while instead it should be considered like that. And a lot of industries, for being more competitive on the market, are simply deciding to not clean what they pollute and just to not rise up their product cost for taking care of the environment. One of the most evident contaminants, as we have seen in the graph at the very beginning of the lecture, is exactly nitrogen. Nitrogen in its more oxidized form, nitrates, which are spread as fertilizers on the ground for speeding up the cultivations, the agricultural practices. And these nitrates are accumulating on the planet. We are going towards an experiment which is called the global fertilization. And we will see in the next slides that this will create a lot of issues in a few decades since now for having access to agricultural lands still in good conditions for growing vegetables over there. So the biogeochemical cycles that we have strongly interacted with in the last 2-3 centuries are mainly the carbon one, where we have moved a lot of reduced molecules like I don't know, the oil we are extracting from the ground, the wood we are cutting from forests and so on, and we are burning it. Burning is just an oxidation process which is transforming all this organic carbon, which was methane or proteins, so still carbon linked to some hydrogens and some oxygens, to CO2. We are all making the last oxidation of this carbon, and this has produced an hyper accumulation of CO2, which is the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which has then created the climate change consequence, mainly for what is called the greenhouse effect, because we have a layer of CO2 staying on top of us, which is then reflecting radiations and making them more effective in heating the very last kilometers of the atmosphere. The climate change will produce this enormous amount of bad consequences that you see here. I could discuss this for more than 1 hour, so I can't enter in details. Just know that we are really melting down all the solid phase of the water of the planet, so they are all the different ice that we have spread around. And if it is melting, the level of the oceans and the seas will rise up, as it is doing already. So a lot of cities which are nearby the coast will go under the water quite soon, most probably, if we don't do nothing in the middle, in the wild. And we will have more intense meteorological events like rain events. Which is meaning that we really have to adapt to different behaviors and different ways to deal with the access to the resource, to water in the time around the planet, just trying to readapt to whatever is going to change for the slight change in temperature due to the accumulation of the carbon dioxide. In some regions like the Mediterranean, for instance, that's exactly a poster produced for a recent conference here for the Mediterranean area, where we are already having forecast of an increase of 2.2 degrees, which is much higher than the 1.5 that should be the target the international level for not going over that number because of the terrible consequences that are going to take place if we pass that threshold. And for 2040, which is quite close, it's only 20 years since now, we are expecting to have like 1 meter of water more, and 1/3 of the regions which are going to disappear under the water and so on. So really a lot of big issues to deal with. And then, yes, I was talking about the global fertilization process. That's you know that in the atmosphere we have 70% of the nitrogen that we are breathing every time we keep a bit of air in our lungs. That's 70% of N2 gas, which is an inert molecule. But there are some very efficient bacteria which are living everywhere in the planet at every kind of altitude in all the continents. They are really well spread and very fair in doing their action. And they are just taking the N2 from the air and transforming it instead in a reduced form of nitrogen, which is called ammonia. So it's losing all the electrons, and it's in this way becoming more active as kind of chemical compounds, and so they can be part of living species. They enter in the structure of the cells, for instance, of the biological cells. And so in this phase, when the nitrogen is reduced by, for instance, some leguminous plants, which are containing they're making support on their roots for this nitrogen fixing bacteria that are then making the nitrogen available for the life cycles. So here the nitrogen is entering into plants, into animals, and so on, up to the phase in which some of it, in the more oxidized form as nitrate, is then meeting some denitrifying bacteria which are sending it back again to the atmosphere. So all this process was all biologically mediated by very small animals, the bacteria, by more complex one, plants and animals, let's say, and then coming back to the atmosphere. All this process is quite slow, so it needs time. And what we have invented for providing more food to the growing population in the world is just to make synthesis of this ammonia starting from the atmospheric nitrogen with a reaction which is called Haber-Bosch reaction, which is consuming energy. And so at the moment, we are just synthesizing some fertilizers that we are spreading in the fields for speeding up the process of the nitrogen fixing bacteria, so helping them, let's say, producing more than what they were able to produce, for spreading more fertilizers on the land for getting food in a faster way, in a more efficient way. But this has a consequence. And the consequence is that we don't do the other action, which is to make the denitrification. Or at least we do that in the wastewater treatment plants. So a part of this action is also supplied by the humans instead of the bacteria in the wastewater treatment plants, where we are processing at the end the excreta of the food consumption, which are exactly what we are producing after having consumed the food. But not all the nitrates are sent back to the atmosphere in a dynamic equilibrium. And so we slowly are observing an accumulation of nitrates on the lands of the planet. So where you see these colored areas, that was before the start of the industrialization. So all was quite green colored, so not high deposition of nitrogen oxides. But instead, like 30 years ago, the situation was already like this. And that's the forecast for 2050, where you see these very colored areas, especially when they are becoming purple. This is meaning that the accumulation of nitrates is really too high, and then we have a sort of a hyper-fertilization of those pieces of land. And it's like when you are spreading too much fertilizer and you are burning the plants that you are going to grow over there. So there are so too many nutrients available there that the plants are taking them in a too fast way, and the result is that they are suddenly dying. All this land can become not usable for agriculture anymore. And the other result is that the other cycle, sorry, is the one of the phosphorus, where we still are making use of P, the phosphorus, in every kind of bottled fertilizer or packeted fertilizer. You are reading normally 3 compounds, N, P, and K, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Those are macronutrients which are needed by every kind of plant for growing. And the problem of phosphorus is that it's available on the earth crust as phosphorus rocks. It needs millions of years to be some way accumulated in specific areas that then are mined by us. And then by mining, we make the phosphorus available as fertilizer, and we use it for making agriculture. So we enter in a cycle which is from days to years. And at the moment, we are discharging all this on the bottom of the oceans. So we have a fine powder that we are moving since more than 1 century, just releasing it as a fine dust that is sedimenting in the bottom of the ocean. The result of this is that we will need then, moving from days to years, we will need then millions of years for having new mines ready when we will have exhausted the ones we are using at the moment. One of the issues is related to the kind of usage of the resources we are doing at the moment. Just consider that more than 7 billion of humans, we have 1 billion of cows and about 1 billion of pigs, which are bred in the planet at the moment, making use of 1/4 of the emerged land, which is dedicated to breeding, that just for producing cereals that then are used to feed all these animals that then we are eating. And just consider that, for instance, this kind of red meat is even containing this very nice molecule here, that it's a neuraminic acid. It's like a sugar at the end in terms of chemical. It's creating a lot of inflammations that, if continued in the time, can even bring to possible complications and cancer. So it's not a so healthy food, and it's really consuming something like 8 kilos of cereals for producing 1 kilo of cow meat, 6 cubic meters of water, and 4 kilos of cereals for producing 1 kilo of pig meat. And you can see that in terms of efficiency, if we produce meat, it's just 1 square. If we produce proteins by vegetable species, that's the efficiency, which is much, much higher in comparison to the meat. And in the meat, we also have some milligrams per kilo of antibiotics that we are bringing together, creating other kind of health issues in the future. So it's not optimized, the kind of usage we are making of the resources, especially if we go towards, at planetary level, to a meat-based diet, which is bringing to deforestation, so a lower CO2 storage and lower O2 production, a scarce efficacy in the land use because of this reduction of the usable land for producing food, and then excessive use of fertilizer, pesticides, and herbicides, and the bioaccumulation of chemicals, and some nutritional issues, as I was showing before. So we need to recover. So the phosphorus peak is exactly what is pictured here. Some specialists are saying that it already took place, having the peak already reached around the 2000. Some others are saying that in these years, 2060, 2070, maybe 2080, we will end up completely, we will be at the end of the Gaussian curve here, which is meaning no extractions anymore of phosphorus from the existing mining areas, which are distributed, as you see here, not in an even way in the planet, which is meaning that if these countries are suddenly saying, okay, we will not export phosphorus anymore, then we will have big issues because, well, all the others will start having food access problems, very strong ones, because they will need fertilizers not anymore available in commercial way. So we need to understand how to make cycles, how to recycle the nutrients and to recover them. And that's because agriculture is strongly dependent by the phosphates, and they are going to end up. At the moment, we are doing exactly this. We are starting from by the Haber-Bosch process to create this synthetic fertilizer in terms of nitrogen, and still we are getting the phosphates from the mining. Then we use the fertilizers, we make the biomass that is then transformed in food for us. When we process the food in our intestine, kidneys, and so on, we are releasing urine, which is the one containing the most of the nitrogen. And by the nitrification, denitrification cycles in the wastewater treatment plants, we are giving back this nitrogen to the atmosphere. All this cycle at the moment, which is not a cycle, it's an open line, let's say, so it's a linear economy approach, has at the moment a cost of about 300 billion of euro per year, which is 1% of the total energy consumption. And if we learn how to cycle these nutrients, we can save the 85% of this amount, and which is not a solo number at the end. We are talking about more than 200 billion of euro per year. And we could really save a lot in terms of impact on the planet. We just even have to consider that in the normal practice of agriculture, making use of pesticides, herbicides, so whatever, to have a massive control of invasors, both as plants, weeds, or otherwise animal pests. If we are using chemicals for doing this, these chemicals are then moving around because of their toxicity and scarce biodegradation capacity, and they are moving around in the planet in the different matrices of which are composing the environment, so the soil, the water, and the air, and they can have really long-range transport phenomena going around the planet like this. That's called the global distillation process, which is meaning that a lot of these organics are, when it's hot and low P, they can evaporate, and then they are transported and they are condensating again at the right latitude. For instance, the dioxins are taking the fly at equatorial level, and then they are going down, let's say, here in Europe, North Germany, Poland, and so on. That's the right latitude where they fall in the rain. And so that's how these POPs, the persistent organic pollutants, are moving around the planet. And unluckily, they are reaching even the two endpoints, the two poles, and they are creating really disasters on the local population, which is showing like genetic modifications because of the interaction with this kind of pollutants. and therefore we should really try to avoid to have them going around in an uncontrolled way. And that's exactly this sort of scenario that is how the planet is working at the moment in terms of management of these relevant resources, which are water, carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus. We should shift from that kind of model to something which is more sustainable, more sound for the environment, and the most important thing, more effective in terms of costs of how economically manage all this. Because at the moment, what we are using is not the most economical solution at all. And that's exactly how our city is designed at the moment. We have just to get rid of whatever we are collecting in terms of water. If it is rainwater, for instance, and if it is falling on a waterproofed surface, a road, a parking lot, a roof, we just have to deal with it in the fastest way as possible, making it disappear, which is just meaning that we build up hidden rivers in the ground. Those are called sewers, and we are delivering in a very efficient and fast way this water all in a sudden to the receiving body. And that has created, obviously, in the years, grow in the cities and grow in this quantity of water to be delivered to the final discharge in the time, to big flooding events issues. And the combined sewer overflows are exactly what is used in the modern engineering for avoiding that mixed sewer where both the rainwater and the domestic used water, which is called the domestic wastewater, are discharged together. So if you have big rain events, a lot of this water will just make the pipe exploding without having this kind of valves, let's say, where the water can flow out when the pipe is going to be too much filled up. And these combined sewer overflows are at the moment one of the main sources of pollution in the rivers, even when all the wastewater management is very well organized, and they are not making the quality of the rivers good enough for swimming or for potable use. Then, still in this old urbanistic concept, we have that all the produced wastewater is conveyed by a centralized wastewater treatment plant by a sewer network. Well, all this model is not efficiently working. We have to change it. What to do for changing it? So the first things we can do is just to apply some smart behaviors in our daily life. And those behaviors are defined in the family of the water-saving technologies. They are very cheap practices that everyone can do. And already by these practices, we can save, let's say, from 5 to 30% of the water consumption day by day. Then we can do a bit more, and we can start, for instance, to invest a bit in some infrastructures. And my specialization is on nature-based solutions. So just replications of natural processes for recycling the water. I mean, for treating it in a proper way and then making another use after that we have used it already one time or even more. Then instead of just dealing with it for making it disappear, for discharging it to the river in the fastest way, we should instead make use of the traditional technologies for using one of the most precious sources, especially in terms of quality of water in the planet, that all our ancestors have used for thousands of years. That was the rainwater harvesting. So rainwater is really the highest quality of water. It's like a distillation process. So it's really only H2O with a few pollutants that the drop of water can meet in the atmosphere when falling, what we have to deal with. But it's really one of the most interesting alternative sources of water, and we should really come back to the centuries-old practices for storing this water in the time and making use of it when needed, instead of just discharging to the rivers in the fastest way. And then we need to learn how to segregate the fluxes of nutrients that we are producing, carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus, and to recover them as much as possible. All these good principles and good approaches are already some way included in the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And for instance, in the number 6, clean water and sanitation, we really have most of these approaches listed, but also in the 11. And also in the 12 is some way interested in the climate action, in the life below water. So we have several of the SDGs which are strongly interacting with this kind of practice, which will be really welcome, if not completely needed in the next decades for the human survival on the planet. So those are listed, the several subtopics of the main SDGs. And just to show you very fast examples about what I'm talking about in terms of the different actions for the water savings, the things to do are just to put these kind of flow reductors in your taps in the devices, like for instance with this kind of flow reducers, you can save several liters in 30 seconds. Depending by their cost, the more complex is anyway still a few dollars or few euros. And so the investment in a house can be in the order of, let's say, $20 in total. And you can already save, let's say, 10 to 20% of your water bill per year by this kind of investment. If you place it on your shower, for instance, which is the device in the house which is consuming more water, you can have really quite good saving of water, going to about 22 cubic meter per year per person of saving, just by using a reducer of flow in the shower head. Adopting the double flush toilet, for instance, that's a calculation made in terms of millions of cubic meters per year in Italy, the 60 millions of the Italians. So these numbers can be much higher in India, where you are a lot of times more in terms of population in comparison to Italy. But what you have to compare is here is just with the normal flush toilet, single button, where you are discharging 10 liters or 12 liters. You are reaching this 8 of the histogram. If we are using the double flush, this one, it's exactly half of it, which is meaning that every kind of government investing, even gifting to the houses this kind of device, since the day after the installation, we'll have to treat half of the wastewater in the wastewater treatment plants, which should already pay the investment, even if the investment is done by public money instead of private investors, let's say. So that could be really a convenient thing to do. Then the next step after the water saving was the recycling of water. And for instance, the easiest to be recycled in the house is the gray water, which has already, it's quite good wastewater in terms of quality. It's easy to be treated. Most of the organics contained are highly biodegradable, and therefore the treatment is very easy. And if you don't discharge it at all, in terms of regulations, in most of the countries you can have even a direct reuse without any kind of treatment. That's an architectural design where the water from the tap, after you are washing your hands, is going to the reservoir for flushing the toilet. So it's not even treated, but it's still in a very good quality. It's water with some soap and some cells of your skin, which are used for flushing excreta. So that you don't really need a very high quality water for doing that. And that's already saving about the 30% of your water bill if you are providing the water for flushing the toilets by an alternative source, which is not the tap water. And so that's exactly the picture of this kind of installation. But there are other kinds of reactors that can be used, from traditional techniques like these ones used in Palestine, Jordan, and so on, which are barrels filled with gravel, and the water is flowing up, flow down, flow inside here. After 3 barrels, in the 4th one, the water is clean. But you can have sequencing batch reactors, membrane bioreactors, constructed wetlands. All these kind of technologies are good, are just depending by the available space you have to be installed for producing the grey water. Just consider that the grey water market is about the 60% of the produced wastewater in a city. And so close looping this water is another branch of possible market expansions in the next years, even considering that we will need new sources of alternative water due to the growing population and the unfair distribution of the good quality water in the planet, as we have seen in the first slides. And we are now working on these green walls a lot. This is really one of the frontiers or the borders of research and the applied research, because we want to treat the grey water on the walls and then to loop it inside the building in order to have, let's say, a 0 kilometer production of good quality water. For reusing it for flushing toilets means already 1/3 of reduction in the water consumption in a house. And then, well, the other topic is the rainwater harvesting. Here the problem is how to design the cistern, which is the more expensive component in the rainwater harvesting design. And so you just have to make a calculation about how much water you need every month and how much rain you can harvest every month, and to make a balance in order to decide what's your optimal investment for the basin. So that's the kind of city we'd like to see in the near future. You see a lot of green, which is inserted inside instead of the very gray former design that we have seen a few slides ago. And all these green are exactly what we are defining NBS, nature-based solutions, which are having every time more than one function. For instance, a green roof or a vertical garden, a green wall, can, yes, treat, for instance, the grey water and make it available for a next cycle, but they can even make a sort of, let's say, thermal and acoustic insulation to the building itself. And if you make efficient thermal insulation, this is meaning less energy in summer for making air conditioning. This is meaning less heating in the cold countries for heating in winter. And that's saving energy. So there is quite a good link between these kind of installations in terms of side effects and energy optimization, for instance. But then you can even think to make use of the resources which are containing in the wastewater, carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus, for growing something. And so you can partially treat by wetlands, for instance, by these kind of nature-based solutions defined as treatment to wetlands. you can treat the water up to the desired quality for making fertigation of some crops. And then you are producing here the biomass that then you are processing and so on. Or you can use this water for making short rotation plantations. Here the biomass is then used to create energy, burning it or just putting it in a biogas reactor and creating biogas. So we can really have a lot of interactions in a well-designed urban cycle, creating a strong nexus between the water, the nutrients, and the energy. So the water, the food, and the energy. For doing this, the first step we need is just to give proper economic numbers. And so what we have to understand is that the nature has a value, which is defined as natural capital. Now a lot of economists are starting really giving numbers. I mean, that lake has a value of some billions of rupees, let's say, no? And that river has this other value, and so on. So if you are going to lose in terms of ecosystem services that your natural system is providing, if you are going to lose in terms of these ecosystem services, you are going to lose economic values, monetary values. And that has to be understood, because if you lose the ecosystem services, then you have to recreate them. And if you have to recreate them, then that kind of investment can be exactly estimated and justified. So we need the economists to work together with us, other kind of scientists, for dealing with the investment in green infrastructures in the proper way. And all this is just considered in these new approaches, which are defined in the big family of the circular economy. At the beginning, we were talking about the eco-efficiency, but we have discovered that the eco-efficiency, where we have the zero emissions, reduced consumption to be sustainable and so on, is just a delay of problems. We do things, but that's not enough for solving the issues, let's say. It's just delaying them. Because we are still staying, by doing this, being eco-efficient, we are still, in most of the cases, staying in the linear approach, which is take, make, and dispose. And instead, we should shift to this other, which is called the circular approach, where we think to the waste as a new source for creating food. And there is a trademark already deposited, which is called cradle to cradle. And that's the approach which is talking instead of eco-efficiency as eco-effectiveness. So what I really have to do for getting there. And so it's this cradle to cradle is divided in three main groups of approaches. The first one is called the waste equals food, which is the nutrient recycling, and then energy, solar energy as the main source of energy for the whole planet, and then a lot of biodiversity to be celebrated, to bring back the biodiversity on the planet in terms of cultural diversity, conceptual diversity, and the physical biodiversity itself. So that cradle to cradle has a sort of philosophy, which is to develop a world which is diverse, safe, healthy, and with clean air, water, soil, and power, economically, equitably, ecologically, and elegantly enjoyed. Which is perfectly what we are also saying in our nature-based solutions approach, integrated in circular economy in the city. And there are already some eminent professors which are theorizing this since decades. For instance, that's an example coming from the Davis University, which is in Florida. And Professor Choganopoulos was theorizing to make use of the old sewers for placing inside them, by retrofitting, one pipe, a yellow pipe, which is, for instance, segregating all the urine. Instead of making the Haber-Bosch reaction, we can keep the urine as it is, and we will see in the next slides how this can become very easily value in terms of fertilizers produced. And then we can have another pipe, a black pipe, which is bringing the black water and the gray water. Better if we even segregate them and have the black water alone and the gray water alone, that could be recycled at building level without going in the sewer at all. And then the existing sewer could only bring the stormwater without having an interaction of it, a mixture of it with the polluted one. And that's how, at the block level, we should organize the cities. So every block should have, for instance, its own reactor where to produce biogas, where to treat the grey water and recycle it into the same building themselves. So instead of building a lot of grey infrastructures in the cities, like sewers that have to collect big amount of water around, we should try to decentralize as much as possible, decreasing a lot the dependency by the grey infrastructures, which are concrete made and that are failing in the time because they need maintenance, replacement, and so on. So the closer and the more decentralized loops we are able to design, the better it is in economic terms and in eco efficacy at the end. Another eminent professor is Willy Verstraete from Ghent University in Belgium, and for instance, he's a microbiologist, and he says that for dealing with the climate change and the emergencies of the next century, what we need to learn in terms of developing applied research practices is how to get energy from non-fossil origin, so mainly by excreta, animal and human excreta, making use of the anaerobic digestion, so production of biogas, and how to lower the CO2 emissions to the atmosphere, for instance, converting CO2 and by some bacteria action, and we can convert it to methane or to proteins. And this guy has been able to make some edible proteins starting from excreta, for instance, just making use of specific families of synthetic bacteria, which are making synthetic proteins, which are very good in terms of nutritional properties. They just need to have a good shape, a good taste. So some work is still needed, probably by some colleagues of mine, some chemists, that have to make these proteins more appealing in order to be used as food. And then we can make a bit of mining of the sewers, for instance, for getting sulfur and phosphorus and some metals out of them. And so we are talking about sewer mining as a new practice of mining in the urban structure. And obviously, what I was mentioning before, to reuse the water in the closest loops as possible for the new urban metabolism. And in all this, we should also introduce this nitrogen food nexus, so how to grow your food exactly where you are still having the nitrogen in the proper form to be reused. So when it's discharged by urine in the sewer. Applying a lot of these recoveries, what we, in terms of trying to give a value, we can estimate about 80 to 85 euros per person per year in terms of recovery capacity from all these different sources. For instance, I was talking about the phosphorus, which is going to be lacking. There is one nice salt, which is called struvite, which is a magnesium phosphate ammonium salt. Phosphate, sorry, which is like this, is a white crystal. You just add some magnesium to the urine and the crystal goes down. So it's very easy to make it, to produce it. It's just a precipitation. And there are already a lot of companies like this Crystal Green, which is in Canada, which are commercializing the fertilizer. And so that's a direct production of fertilizer from the urine. There is another spin-off in Switzerland. That's a spin-off of the EAWAG, the Switzerland Institute for Water, where just concentrating and disinfecting 10 liters of urine, they are producing 1 liter of this product, one called Aurin, and 2 bottles of each, of 500 milliliters each, are sold for 18 euro. So you just consider that from 10 liters of urine, you can obtain 18 euro as a final product, which is also a quite interesting option for new products and new markets. There is a project which is called smartplant.eu. It's a Horizon project where, for instance, from the wastewater, getting out the volatile fatty acids, they are producing these biopolymers, plastic production, but then in the same project, they also make struvite, nutrients recovery, and they make also cellulose recovery from the toilet paper, and some energy efficiency by aeration or by recovery of biogas. And then there is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which is paying funding since a lot of years, every year, a new edition of inventors of new toilets. That's another super interesting branch of green markets and green jobs. Because yes, you have exactly to make use of all the good stuff that is contained in the excreta, carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus, and water, for getting it out and reusable instead of having this open linear approach and going to a wastewater treatment plant and transforming everything to carbon dioxide and gaseous nitrogen. It's much better to keep the good ionic substances as they are. And so there is the need of good inventions, which are even very well paid by the Gates Foundation, for trying to recover and optimize the resources recovery. There are even some nice projects made by algae. The algae are able to accumulate this carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus, producing, for instance, biohydrogen and ethanol and biodiesel. And all these are products of the biorefineries. So you are producing by wastewater and algae exposed to the light pipes, so glass pipes or plastic pipes, and then you press the algae and extract in the biorefineries all these very nice products. And you can play even with some architectural landscaping in placing these bioreactors everywhere in your urban planning. And the very last frontier is the vertical farming. So the building itself and the population living inside here is producing everything, nutrients, water, and so on, which are aimed to make crops inside the building, which can be very protected, isolated totally from the external part of the world. So you don't have need of pesticides because animals, the flying animals can't fly inside if it is everything very, very well confined with filters and so on. And so you can have zero distance in terms of consumption, zero waste, zero emissions, zero pesticides, and zero power. Everything is almost self-sustained inside the same building. And that's a quite smart concept that could overcome that issue of the availability of land if we are hyper-fertilizing the planet lands, the agricultural planet lands in the next years. Then the solution will be to go vertical and to make this kind of closed loop buildings which are producing everything that's needed for food provision to the users of the building itself. And we are just developing these kind of concepts in 2 current projects that you can look at on the website. One is called the Hydro-USA, and the other one, which is located in India, is called Pavit. They are both trying to create this link from wastewater, food production, and energy production. The same United Nations University is showing since several years these slides where you have, for instance, production, a numeric production in terms of megajoule per square meter of direct combustion, for instance, of the biomass you can grow in a nature-based solution treating wastewater. But you can even have biomass growing here that then is put in a biogas generator, in a biogas reactor, and then you burn the biogas and you obtain this amount of liters of biogas per square meter and then energy. Or you can have direct reuse, growing other kind of biomasses, even directly food. And for instance, here the United Nations has made some estimation about 1 ton of maize that can be produced by 3,000 square meters of irrigated land in a small community, which is treating all the wastewater by a nature-based solution. So that's the kind of approach where the nature-based solution is becoming part of the cycle, exactly as in the green integrated city we were looking before. And finally, just for closing the topic, we have a last occasion with the rainwater management. There are nowadays these urban green infrastructures called SUDS, Sustainable Urban Drainage Systems, mainly aimed to reduce the flooding risk, but they can even be thought as a way to produce new water to be used in the city, because they tend to keep back the water cycle to the pristine, so where you were having the stream with the mineralization and so on, and a very elevated storage capacity of the territory. Nowadays, instead, the water is flowing in a very accelerated way to the final discharge, and the results is exactly more floodings and more damages. For avoiding this, we can go through this blue-green dream approach, so substantially creating a lot of retention of water in the cities by ditches, by cisterns, by water parks, and all these are very good occasions of green economy and green jobs to be created, because you are saving money in terms of reducing the flooding damages that then will be paid back by the population, and you are investing in creative jobs and nice opportunities of multifunctional spaces which are providing a lot of ecosystem services in the cities. And those are a lot of pictures of installations of these green infrastructures in the urban planning. So those are really good occasion for providing biomass, for providing rainwater storage, and all this rainwater can then be used for other usages in the cities, like I don't know, washing the roads, anti-fire actions, and so on. And even the combined sewer overflows that I was saying before is one of the main sources, remaining sources of pollution, where you are still treating your wastewater in a centralized wastewater treatment plant. You can have these water parks where you use the water from the combined sewer overflow for being treated in nature-based solutions that can be part of some nice water parks, ensuring leisure and biodiversity to the population living there. And yes, those are just the last examples of these diffused green infrastructures for dealing with stormwater or grey water in the cities. And with this last slide, we have been used to see this curve applied to the COVID spread in the planet and how to limit it by the lockdown. That's just converted a bit, let's say, what we should be able to reach by making use of a lot of innovation and a lot of conversion, a sort of paradigm shift from the linear economy approach to the circular economy approach, and the adoption of a lot of nature-based solutions in the cities is to stay into the capacity, the land capacity of the planet, and to stay into an approach defined as resource-based economy, which is a bit contrasting with this big blue Gaussian, which is the capitalism and its consequences in terms of climate risk increase. And with this, I've ended up. That's the planet without water, what you see on the left. And so I hope we will never have to observe something like that by the space shuttle or the space central when we will be there in the space looking down. Many thanks. If you have questions, I hope I've been a bit late, but not so much.
Not at all, Fabio. Thank you so much for such a wonderful and insightful presentation. We do have certain questions, and I hope that we may have your time to take it. Can we take quick 4 or 5 questions?
Yes.
Okay. So should I put them on the screen? Can you see it?
How can we perceive, frame, and implement nature-based solutions in rural contexts? Well, it's even easier than the urban one, because what's mainly the main issue in implementing NBS is their high footprint, because we are replicating, we are mimicking natural processes, and most of the time the natural processes are slower in comparison to the industrial anthropogenic processes. And so for keeping this contact time in the reactors, let's say, where we want to have processes taking place, then we need to ensure quite long retention time. So in the rural context, it's much easier to create the energy, water, food nexus, because you can link, for instance, the water and the sanitation cycle to the peri-urban agriculture in a more efficient way. You need less piping, you have much more horizontal surfaces available over there at a very good cost, let's say. So in the rural context, you can do that even better than in the urban settlement, because of the more available space and the more close contact between agriculture and normal living in the city.
Thank you so much, sir. We have second question by
How can we obtain pure cultures of microalgae from algae-grown wastewater sample? It is possible or not? Yes. I mean, it's just a matter of isolating the right strains of microalgae that you want to grow in the pipes, and then to keep the pipes closed, not in contact with the external world. So exactly the kind of strains of algae you are putting inside are the ones that you will harvest on your as dishes at the end. You are obtaining just pressed dishes of algae. Hi, Fabio from China team. Wonderful hearing you. Just a question: how much would it be needed to invest in order to make a water use unit for a family of 5-10 people with less tech? let's say with the low for a family of 5 to 10, with an average consumption of about 100 liters per person. For recycling the gray water, I would say that you can do that with an investment of $600-700.
That's great.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's for a family of 10, let's say, from 500 to 1,000.
So we have one more question by Achal.
Yeah, what are the methods of removing nitrogen and phosphorus from the water? Well, the methods for the classic methods for the nitrogen is to make this nitrification, denitrification, which is meaning that all the organic nitrogen containing in proteins, for instance, is brought to the ammonia, which is the more reduced form, and then the ammonia is oxidized to nitrates, and then the nitrates are denitrified to N2, which is going back to the atmosphere. That's the normal way to deal with nitrogen in wastewater, which is a biological method. For phosphorus, there are no biological methods which are so efficient. I mean, there is the biological accumulation of nitrogen, but there are, let's say, chemical methods which are much more efficient. So most of the times you are just precipitating the phosphorus in insoluble salts that then you have separated from the water because they are not soluble. And you can recover by sedimentation these salts and then recover the phosphorus. That's the most efficient and let's say even wise technique, because you can recover the phosphorus without discharging it to the river.
We have one question.
Any smart city project using this technology for wastewater treatment? Yeah, there are. There are several smart cities projects at the moment. In Europe, there are at least 5 to 10 which are going on at the moment. And let's say for the wastewater treatment, we are still in experimental phase. So we have these Horizon 2020 projects, for instance, which are some way subsidizing industrial choices. So at the moment, it's still not a fully marketable approach, let's say. It still needs to be experimented. In some countries, we have still regulation issues. For instance, there is not a uniform regulation, not even at continental level, for sure not at planetary level, for regulating the wastewater reuse. There are some big institutions which have tried to make regulations like the WHO, but still it's not adopted in the same way everywhere. And so obviously this is influencing the cost of the tap water and the reusable water a lot. Some other regulations are, for instance, related to the fertilizers. I've shown you the struvite. The struvite is a very promising technology. It's a salt, but the technology for getting it clean and out from the wastewater is a very promising one. But still, in some countries, struvite is not officially approved in the list of fertilizers. Theoretically, it's a very good fertilizer because it has all the right elements inside, but it needs to be listed. And so it's just a matter of approval, which needs normally years, and to start these approval processes everywhere in the world. That's some way something which is preventing the adoption of the approach in some locations. Future plans and programs, apart from current program that you actually undertake. Yeah, well, I have a lot. I mean, but for sure, what we are going to do is to try to implement this nexus, water, energy, and food, in the more ways that is possible. We have cost action, for instance. It's CA, 17133. You can look on Google for it. And that's a construction which is putting together all the circular cities which are going to experiment this approach in the next years. And we are part of it. It's a lot of European institution, companies, research bodies, which are clustered together in this cost action just for studying this kind of programs. Yeah.
So thank you, Dr. Fabio, for taking such wonderful QA round, and you definitely have answered all the questions with very wonderful answers. And I still remember like your project Pavitra, which is going in India between EU and India Water Corporation on potential and validation. That's I hope will be having lot more potential for the EU and India collaboration as well as between IRIDRA and with the Indian firms. So now I request Ms. Renu from the Tech Counselor team would she'll be just putting the vote of thanks to you for this wonderful session.
Many
Renu,
thanks.
over to you.
Many thanks to all of you for your attention.
Thank you, Mukesh. Am I audible?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, please.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Fabio, for such a wonderful, detailed, and extensive research-oriented session focused toward startup on topic nature-based research and innovation solution for the next generation startup. I must say your vast experience of 2+ decades have made such a complex topic very interesting. And you have explained it in a very innovative and generalized way and with lots of examples. We have been hearing this from our childhood to preserve and live in harmony with nature. I am very much certain that this wonderful session of yours will ignite new thought process toward the sustainable future. Before I conclude, I would like to quote the thoughts of Ban Ki-moon. Saving our planet, lifting people out of poverty, advancing economic growth, these are one and the same fight. We must connect the dots between climate change, water scarcity, energy shortage, global health, food security, and women empowerment. Solution to one problem must be solution for all. Once again, thank you, sir, for your valuable words and valuable time. It's great honor to have you for this session. Thank you so much, sir.
Many
And
thanks to
thank
you
you
all.
everyone for yeah, thank you. Thank you everyone for your presence. Tomorrow we will connect on GoToMeeting platform for our next session with Mr. Vinay Chaudhary, who will be taking lecture on IoT and its practical approach on startups. Thanks again for joining us today, and we will see you tomorrow at 1 p.m. Thank you. Now handing over to Mr. Dr. Sembal for the conclusion. Hello, Dr. Sembal, are you there?
I think we might have lost his connection, but indeed he was with us for the whole time. Fabio sir, it was really a great pleasure to have you with us, and I'm very much thankful for you for accepting our request to be on the expert session and all. Thank you, sir. Thank you once again.
You're welcome. Bye, everybody. Thanks again.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Thanks again. Thanks again.